Good morning. Went on a trip to Alaska, I don't know how many years ago it's been, just a few I guess, maybe longer than I think. And there was a lady that impressed me at one of the villages. Now we might call them Eskimos, but they don't call themselves that. They have names for their tribes. And I remember after going to the totem poles, seeing all of those at Ketchikan, we went on to a village that was in the background, somewhere where you had to take a little paddle boat to get to it back this little estuary. And there's a lady named, and I'm going to say Dottie, Betsy or Betty, I can't remember her name for sure, I wish I could, it's just been too long, who was sewing, S-E-W, a parka. And someone said, how long have you been on? She said, about half a year, and she'll be sewing it for another half a year or longer. She will make this parka to where it will last for generations. She has got a parka, at least one, that's in the Smithsonian Institute, because she is evidently the premier craftsman of parkas. Now down here, we don't know all that, and I'll take their word for it. But amazing thing to me was the detail of sewing and sewing and sewing, stitching, stitching, stitching. And there's like as many as 7 different animal skins put together to make this parka. And when this person dies it's made for, it gets passed down to the next generation, and the next one, and the next one. And these are made to go through at least 5 generations, if not longer. Can you believe that? That means there's a lot of careful detail, craftsmanship, and it's thought through very carefully when it's done. Well, now let's take the other word, sow, S-O-W. Now, I know some people could say that also says sow, but we're talking about the word sow, like sowing a seed. When I hear that story all my life, as a kid and as an adult, I think about, okay, sowing seeds. My grandpa used to take his little wheeled thing with a little, whatever you call them. I don't know, I can't remember the name anymore. But he'd take that thing and he'd push it through his garden, make rows, and then he'd go back and he'd drop seeds with his hand, and then he'd come back another time and take his feet and kick the dirt over top of them. That was it. Let the loose dirt just sit down there. The rain would soak it in, I guess, and that was the end of the story. And then he'd go water them that day so he could remember where the rows were, since it was all leveled out a little bit. Now, a lot of people don't do it that way, but that's how he did it, and it worked. Sowing, though, he always had one for the worms and one for himself when he sowed. And then my little brother Kimmy, when he was alive, he would help him, and Grandpa and he got a kick out of that because Kimmy was such a little boy, and he would fall behind. He would help his papaw sow all the seeds. So Grandpa was teaching his grandson how to do what he did. And Kimmy passed away when I was a senior in high school after 8 years of an illness. But he was a cute little guy, and his little blue jeans barely stayed up. And I remember Papaw was teaching him how to sew. Now, this is interesting to me because Jesus came out to tell a story of the parable of the sower. He saw a farmer in the distance, perhaps not, or he's seen one somewhere along the way, but he knew how it worked anyway because he's God actually coming down to man. But he started talking about the parable of the sower, and the people heard the story because it was one of many. Some days he would start one story after another, you know that from our studies, and he'd tell a story about this and this and this and this, and every one of them networked together like they were being sown as stories to help us put a complete life together for ourselves. His parables were very important messages because when he started teaching in parables, when that point came, the idea was to make you think, and then he would explain some, but not all of them. He'd let you think about lots of them until you could figure it out for yourself. But the point was, the disciples were always sitting there, Jesus was always teaching, and they were learning how to teach from him, number one. And don't think they didn't retell his stories later on in life. We just don't have the record for it. But why wouldn't they? That's what I do today, is I look at the stories they told back then, and I use them to present a message to people in an audience like this one now. Can you imagine how many centuries sowing of this word has been going on? How many centuries is somebody's mind getting to hear these stories, maybe for the first time? Some for more than once, and saying, when they hear it the second, third, fourth, or fifth time, oh yeah, I already know that story, I know it, da-da-da-da. If we let ourselves think that way. Or we start looking at, what did I miss before in this story that can add to it to make me stronger, to make me more capable, so that I too can sow. You see, here's the thing. Whether you're a preacher, a teacher, or a helper in the church of some other type of ministry, you sow something. You've heard people use the expression that they've sown seeds of discord in this group that over here that caused trouble and stuff. But for us, sowing seeds of His love and His life can come in so many ways. Maybe it's in a teaching moment I have with a child at home when I'm explaining to them discipline or loving God and loving others. Maybe it comes in a Sunday school class. Maybe it comes in the workplace. It could come so many ways when people are sowing the ideas and the truths of Jesus. Well, let's read in chapter 13 of Matthew, verses 1 through 23, the parable of the sower, and then we'll continue from there. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a good crop, 160 and 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let him hear. The disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? He replied, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing but never understanding. You will be ever seeing but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their turn, and I would heal them. Blessed are you, your eyes, because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on the rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution come because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good ground refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. All right, now granted, that could be a little bit of a fast read in many ways, but what a story. This story is for you. If you're sitting here, it's for you. Wherever you are in life, this describes you, or where you've been and where you've gone back to. It could be so many ways, you, when you think about it. If we're called to sow and we're called to receive the sowing, both, how do we do it? If we're not the preacher and I'm not the teacher, how do I do that? Well, first of all, before we get to that, let's talk about why do people lose faith or don't have it in the first place? Why do they not have it? He told the story here. Jesus told them, didn't he? What happens? If we go back and dissect the sentence and think about each sentence and try to apply it to ourselves, we can figure out where we fit in. It won't take us long to know. Verse 11 tells us something why people lose their faith or they don't have it. They have no understanding of the kingdom of heaven. For us, it's got to be real. When I give my life to Christ, it's because I believe there's a real kingdom, and there's a real glory to behold, and I have a real place to belong to, not a fictitious place. The world would have us believe that this was relevant back in the first century, but not today. Think about this. If you're God, do you change with the times? If your perfection, does perfection correct itself, reallocate itself, move itself to another direction? If you're really God, then you don't change. But people's response does. Everybody seems to, at one time or another. And we know where we want to be, but we know where we quite often are in life at times. Experiencing spiritual deterioration is what verse 15 says is another reason they would fall away. Willfully deaf, blind, or dull of sensibility. In other words, I don't want to hear it. I reject the preacher, so I reject what he says. I reject the teacher, so I'm not going to listen to what they say. Here's the thing, though. Back in those days, in the first century, they were sent by God to be ambassadors for our good, to tell us and impart His word. Today, when we mistreat the messengers, as so often we do, we're saying, God, you can't speak to me anymore because you're not using Him, that's for sure, because I won't listen. Now, you might say none of us here ever does that, but don't you know someone who did? And they break your heart. I've had family and friends that have done that. They've heard the same word I heard, but they didn't receive it the same way. That's what happens. Some people are so stiff-necked about their knowledge and their head being this way or that way about certain things that they can't let themselves be pliable when the message is given. They can't come in saying, something today will help me with my life. Something today will change me for the better, or will strengthen me in what I already knew and remind me. But there are people who have no understanding of the kingdom of heaven, what it really is, and it's not for everybody. Everybody does not go to heaven. Remember the Disney movie, All Good Dogs Go to Heaven? It's not good people. It's people who would be willing to follow His lead, who would follow God's way instead of the world's ways. That's a big difference than just everybody goes. That's never been true, ever, with God, although He wishes we would all listen and all follow. Being willfully deaf says, I can't hear words you're saying because it doesn't agree with what I think. I already think this way, and you're not going to change my mind. I know people like that, don't you? Blind or dull of sensibility just because they choose to be. And then there's the person who maybe doesn't believe now but they once did, but the church let them down. They saw their family not be so perfect, even though they were trying to follow the Lord. They went to church and didn't hear anything that made any difference to them. Or they tried to serve for a while, but their service was put down by somebody and hurt their feelings, and so they just won't ever go back to that place or any place like it. I'm saying that not to pick on anybody, but to make us aware of what we do, the mind games we play when God's sowing seed in your heart anytime He gets a chance, anytime you will give Him the opportunity. This is what happens, though. We either don't have faith or we give it away. But there are 4 types of hearers. You saw that. We got to get to the 4, don't we? We always do. So let's go with them. Those, I'm going to call it the beaten path. Just change the name just a little bit, but it's the same thing. Those on the beaten path, because sometimes we're just beaten down. They hear but don't really understand and don't ask for help. They're too tired and too weary. It's like, the thing about getting up to go to church, I really like to sleep in. I work all week, and I guess we tell God, fend for yourself and leave me out of it, without saying those words. We hear but don't really understand and ask for His help. They quickly forget what they heard. Maybe they went and listened for a little while. They went grudgingly. Someone made them go, like the kid that's going from school because the parents said you're going to go as long as you live in this house. Because the parent is hoping something will catch hold while they have you. That one message, if that's all it takes, will turn you on to Jesus and the reality of who He is and what He does. Parents are trying to figure it out just like everybody else. What do we do to get you to love Jesus? We can't force it on you. We can't make you. And you watch, and maybe as they get older and older, you see them start to fall away, and they have no idea how much they've broken your heart. How much they're bending for the world and giving you the Lord up that you tried to teach them to love is just eating you alive. Because you see, that's how it does to Jesus. He loves us so much that he gave his life. That's how important we were to him. You need to hear that from time to time, over and over and over again. That's how much he loved you. And your parents, would they not give their lives for you? I believe mine would have. My dad risked his in Korea many times for many people he never knew. But wouldn't they give their lives for you if that's what it took? I've often said, Lord, if I have to go early in life so someone else comes to love the Lord, I would make that trade if that's what I have to do. Just tell me how to help so-and-so decide to love you again if they did once, or to love you for the first time if they don't now, if they never really did. Well, these people quickly forget. They focus on not on learning, but just on abiding, getting through it. R.C. Trench is a speaker from some time ago, not too long ago. He wrote this in one of his articles in Baker Bookhouse in a book called Notes on the Miracles of Our Lord. He said, here is a man, he's talking about this parable, here's a man who has exposed his heart as a common pathway to every evil influence of the world, till it has become hard as a pavement. Dulled conscience, jaded settlements, perverse will, prejudiced intellect, all contribute to his inability to comprehend. In other words, this guy who fell on the beaten path, he had heard so much of what the world had to say, and they could make sense of it because he gave them the time of day to hear what they had to say, but he didn't give God equal time. Who's going to win out in anybody's mind? The one who gets your attention, aren't they? Usually. Those on the beaten path. Enough said about that. I want to move on. Let's go to those on rocky ground. They immediately receive the word with excitement. This is the ones who are excited. They're usually based on emotional faith. Their heart is stirred to emotionalism, but their brain is not really engaged. This is one of the things about revivals of the old days. You could get people whipped up into a stir, get them weeping, and when one or two or three come forward because they feel like such beaten down sinners, then others come. And in the old days of the revivals, you could have 10 or 12 people coming forward on a night. And it seemed real, and everybody was caught up in the emotionalism of it all. But then there was no follow-up. And they gave their life to Christ because they found out some things, some very important things. Their heart is stirred to emotionalism, but their brain was not really engaged in what was being said. They lose joy or enthusiasm when troubles come, or they are persecuted by friends because they found this faith. Their neighbors or others maybe give them a hard time or shun them because now they make them nervous because they haven't done the same. They fall away because they relied too much on feeling, and feeling good, by the way, but not on maturing. And see, that's where the permanent change comes in. If you're always surface fed, you don't grow deep. Like Paul said about milk and meat, remember? I'd have you get into the meat, but you're still in the milk. You can't let years of your life go by and you've never grown any deeper and expect to stay with it very long. Because the world will grab you as quickly as they can, especially when they see your weaknesses of your faith. Well, these people that fall away because of their feelings, they accept the word at first because there's real joy in hearing, as Jesus said. There's great joy if you think about it in hearing, I'm forgiven. Wouldn't that feel good to hear that? I go to revival, I'm sitting there, the guy gives the invitation, says, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, Jesus still loves you and he'll give you a second chance and he'll forgive you. And that's true. It's like, wow, I heard I'll be forgiven. But not what does it cost me and what will I have to do? He loves me that much. So, many like this will admire Christ a lot and respect the beauty of something that's so holy and so loving. The great problem, they mistake this for real faith and attachment to Christ as a whole person as he has to be for them. They won't patiently continue to labor in love and faith, so it really takes a hold of their very own soul, because it takes a little work too. And the word work isn't bad in this case. It's a joyful labor. But this happens to people on rocky ground. Then we go to people who are those on the thorns. Ooh, who likes thorns? Sticky? I got stung by 3 hornets yesterday. Linda got stung by 1. All I was doing was mow my own grass, and they thought they could take over my yard. It hurt. And I remembered thistles, stepping on thistles when I thought of that at that moment for some reason, and things that are pointed. It's not fun. Well, these people, they let the worries of life or pursuit of wealth or belongings choke out their good growth. Now, hear what I'm saying. They let their worries of the life, that the things they let stress them out, they can't turn over to Jesus. Pursuit, in other words, wholeheartedly going after other things that will take away from their time with Him. Maybe getting wealthier, having more things to play with, so more things to do with your time. And everything just all of a sudden starts choking, like weeds do plants, good plants. Starts choking the Lord out of your life. And it happens a little bit at a time, my friends. It doesn't happen fast. It's very subtle, very clever. Oh, I'm just going to do this for a little while, this here and this there. And pretty soon it becomes an all-time thing. Their own desires kill the roots of spiritual growth in their own life. See? They have a tendency to only want Christ now, part-time, if at all. And how sad that would be. There's a saying that what will grow thorns will also grow wheat. We should remember that. In other words, the potential is there for spiritual growth, but the mind and heart are too occupied with other things. But otherwise, the wheat could grow where the tares are now. You see, friends, the mind and the heart can only hold so much activity until they're overwhelmed and distracted. You can only give yourself to so many things that get your attention before the things that give you what you call the most satisfaction or what have you. Sadly, in many cases, that can mean it's not the Lord. Being overwhelmed and distracted is a scary thing for a Christian. And sometimes if you're watching it in another person's life, you see it, but you don't have any right to say anything, or they won't let you say anything, or they won't help you or encourage you. Or someone calls you and says they miss you at church Sunday, and you get annoyed by it instead of glad they called. You got to start thinking to yourself, why did their checking up on me annoy me instead of make me glad? Why? Maybe you're living in that world of thorns and didn't realize it. There's other things you're pursuing that just mean more than Jesus. And no matter what you say, you can't make that look different than it is. Our lives will always tell on us whoever we are, my friends. This is why you and I must always know where we stand, where we are, how we're growing, what's causing us to grow. But your mind and heart can only hold so much. The word they once heard does not bear fruit in keeping with faith, does it? Those words are sad. They once heard. That's past tense. Painful to have to hear. And here's the thing. There is nobody hearing this message today or anywhere else in the world that has ever heard it who has to feel picked on. Just made aware. Awakened. Realize it's not over. You're still alive. You can change. You can turn to Him. You can give Him back your life. It doesn't take that much. Just the first step. And then one after that all the time. In faith. Letting Him have His way and doing it where you get to be that person who does it with gladness because you find that serving Him puts you on a journey path that brings you joy and happiness, and you're useful to other people whose lives are better because you exist. Who doesn't want to feel that with your own life? You bear fruit, in other words, in keeping with your faith. Well, this takes us to the last one here, the 4 Jesus. You know, He saved this one. This is where I want to be and you want to be. Those who realize in this soil, good soil on which to firmly plant. Good soil to firmly plant. They hear, have understanding of what it means, and strive to get more. They realize, wow, I can't wait to hear more. Remember stories Jesus told of somebody who looked forward to hearing more the next day? And Paul? Because what they heard had stirred them to want to do something more with their life than they'd ever imagined. The evidence of their faith can be observed in these people by their actions and the Spirit in them. Harold Fowler is a commentary writer for this commentary in Matthew as well as others. And in his commentary, he writes that a person be willing to hear, then be honest with yourself about where you are, and then apply the Word. 4 things will take place for you in positive growth. Here's the first of them. You position yourself to hear and understand. To get positive growth, you put yourself in position. This would be an example here. How many times have I said, don't stay up so late Saturday night that when you come in here dragging, you can't hear anything that's going on, you can't participate, you can't sing, you can't hear the Word, and you're just there. You're a lump in a log. One of the things you do is say to yourself, I'm going to the house of the Lord. I'm going to get the rest I need. When I get up in the morning, I'm going to come in, turn out everything from the world outside, and prepare my heart and my mind to start receiving the seed that's going to be planted in my life. In spite of whether you and the person and you get along or anything like that, God's Word doesn't go out void. Even Paul said some people do it with wrong motives. Nevertheless, he rejoiced that the Word was being preached. Good soil. Harold Fowler says, position yourself to hear and understand. That's one way to do it. Secondly, you set yourself up to accept the truth. Be ready to say, I'm not going to fight it or argue against it because it won't fit with what I want to be and do. I'm going to think about what it says, listen to it, take it in. See, that's what happens to soil. You plant it, it gets nurtured, water, sunrise, and sundown, and it starts to grow. Third, or that's second, you set yourself up to accept the truth. And James 1, chapter 21, 22, echoes these words this way. He says, he puts the therefore in there in this passage. I like it in James. Get rid of all moral filth and all the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Last 4 words say, do what it says. It's an action thing. Don't just hear it and then deceive yourself because, okay, that was nice. Take it in. Make it part of you. Do what it says. You learn, thirdly, to hold fast to what you learn. You hold on to it better. You retain better when you deliberately set yourself up to receive. You start to retain better than you ever thought you would. No matter where your brain is at, what IQ you are. You learn something at your level. 1 Corinthians 11:2 says, I praise you for remembering me in everything and for holding to the traditions, just as I pass them on to you. Paul, the teacher, the apostle who sat with Jesus in council in the wilderness 3 years, sits here, writes this letter to the Corinthians, and says, I praise you for remembering what I taught you. Not because Paul was proud and boastful, but because it was taking hold. They were in good soil in that church, and they were starting to grow and mature. And you see, the sooner the mature Christians exist in the world, the better off the others are that are growing too, that are behind, little in their walk. Somebody's setting a standard higher than it used to be. Instead of saying, let's bring the standard down because everybody can't conform or keep up. We talk about in the education system, bringing education down so nobody has to feel bad about themselves. How are you going to feel when you can't spell your name or use a cash register when you're 20? Because somebody passed you 3 times in school because they didn't want you to be embarrassed. You got to raise the standard in everything. That's how it gets better. You got to challenge people to be more than what they ever thought they could be, learn more than they ever thought they could learn, grow more than they ever thought they could grow. And this would be the same in the spiritual world. God made us that way, that I could take in today something I didn't take in last week, and it makes me stronger. Or it reminds me of what I knew so I'm stronger, so I don't forget it. Why wouldn't I want that if I'm a Christian who loves the Lord and believes in heaven? We look at Moses. When we see the Hebrews writer write in chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. And here's something said about him. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, bearing witness so that what would be spoken by God in the future. But Christ is faithful as the son over God's house and we are his house, if indeed we hold firmly to our confidence and the hope in which we glory. That's Hebrews 3, 5 through 6. This leads me to a fourth thing that he talked about, Harold Fowler. The fourth thing was this: you become more and more honest and good in the sight of God. And that's what everybody wants. Instead of being jealous of the person that everybody talks about's faith, figure out how they attained it, if it's still true about them, and what does it take for you? How do you get on the journey once and for all? If not going back and reading everything I said here that Jesus explained as what you do. This sower is steps in many times in life to get where you need to be. You become more and more honest and good in the sight of God, and you have a right to receive knowledge of Christ, and you have a heart to do it with gladness. You're glad to learn it. It's not boring to you anymore. I remember when I was a kid, it's like, oh, I got to go to Sunday school. Teacher's so boring. I'll never. Well, how long does this last? When will they be done? Let's distract the teacher so he takes longer to get started. We used to say that when I was a kid. You imagine that, Josh? You'd never do that. And he wouldn't. Why do we always stand in our own way of growth? I'd always wondered that question. How do you get it answered? And for each person, it's got to be a different answer. But then I look at Luke, one of the other gospel writers, when he talks about this same parable. And in Luke 8:15, here's the words he uses for the same story here. But the seed on good soil stands for those with a noble and good heart, who hear the word, retain it, and by persevering, produce a crop. I know of nothing more rewarding than saying, God, I'm going to remain faithful. I'm going to learn all I can. Help me to do it with joy in my heart and spirit. And when I do, be ready to share it whenever you give me an opportunity with somebody else who doesn't know, so that they may hear too. For the Christian, the attitude isn't, can I keep it to myself? Or am I growing? Am I going to go to heaven? Am I safe? But what about everybody around me? What can I do while I'm alive that might just help them get on the right path and off the rocky, thorny, and beaten path? What can I do in my example each and every day to say to you, I love your people because you love them first and you love me first. And we're on a journey together to go home, to be with you. I don't know about you, but I've never met anybody I want to leave behind. And when I think of somebody who won't give themselves to Christ at all, and they just are too stubborn, hard-headed about it, strong-willed, they don't realize it's not Christians pounding on you with what we think and feel. It's wanting to share with you what we know, what we've learned from God. Not because we're smarter or better, but because we're saved and we want everybody to be. The world will never figure out Christians are not phobes. We don't fear somebody else's lifestyle. We just have to see what and measure it against what God's Word says about it. There's a big difference. Because I fear God in awesome respect, I can't choose lifestyle choices, neither can anybody else, that will offend Him. And God's the same in Genesis as He is in Romans. And today, He hasn't changed His mind about anything. Soil, where are you at right now today in your life? Ask yourself. We all sow when we teach a class, preach, lead by example someone, impart wisdom and knowledge to our children. We're sowing. Or simply living a good example of Christ in our everyday life so our friends ask questions. Somebody is always watching. I'll tell you that right now. Somebody's always watching. Even those that are not saved, watch those that are. They're going to want to see, boy, I hope you're not for real. I hope I can prove that you're just as bad as me or no better than I am. Because the answer really is, of course not. But I'm forgiven. Even though I'm flawed, I've been forgiven of my flaws and given a chance to stand on solid ground, as has anybody who's given their life to Christ. But yes, somebody's always watching when we've claimed Christ, and they want to see if it is worth them trusting Him too. When our sowing lands on them, how will the seed grow? What soil will it produce for the seed to grow on? We don't always know, but we know it's right to do it, to go and sow. D.M. Stearns was preaching in Philadelphia one time. At the close of the service, a stranger who was visiting came up and said, "I don't like the way you spoke about the cross. So negative. I think instead of emphasizing the death of Christ, it would be far better to preach Jesus as the teacher and the example for all of us." Stearns replied, "If I presented Christ in that way, then would you be willing to follow him?" "I certainly would," said the stranger without hesitation. "All right then," said the preacher. "Let's take the first step. Jesus did not sin. Can you claim that for yourself?" The man looked confused and somewhat surprised. Why no, of course I can't," he said. "I readily acknowledge that I do sin." Stearns replied, "Then your greatest need is to have a Savior, not an example. A real Savior who is the way and the truth and the life." And when those people were sitting on the hillside that day when Jesus told this story, they were all kinds sitting there just like we're here in the story itself, and Jesus knew that when he addressed them. But he was letting them all know equally, I loved you and I died for you too. And you're going to be harder than you are, it looks like, in his mind when he sees your stubbornness versus someone else's. But it was worth it for me to go to the cross. We all need to listen to the Lord when he speaks through messages and lifestyles, examples of all kinds, no doubt about it. And I guess my encouragement to everyone here is don't stop listening. Don't stop hearing, but don't stop doing. Don't stop, period. Because if you take a long break somewhere along the way, it's going to be easier to just stop for good or maybe have a hard time to ever get back to him. So today it's an invitation to decide to come to him and make him Lord once and for all. In your heart, if you need to, publicly if you need to, you decide, because you know where you are with him as we stand and sing this invitation.